In this video, I'm going to be going through how to create an XML document and the associated XML schema. Now, to create an XML document, you can use any sort of text editor, uh, and there are a variety of different types of software that are available to create XML documents and XML schemas. Um, the one that is recommended in the syllabus is Oxygen XML. You can download actually a 30-day trial version of Oxygen XML, and that's one thing you could actually use to complete the individual assignment for XML. Uh, what you need to do is you need to download and install it. And for Mac users, you don't actually install it, but when you download it, it extracts into a file. Um, Now, what I've downloaded is the comprehensive version of Oxygen, which is Oxygen XML author, developer, and editor. Um, Now, the version of Oxygen I'm going to be using is Oxygen XML editor. And so once you've downloaded it and either extracted it or installed it, you can use Oxygen XML editor. You're going to have to actually ask them for a license key, and they'll send you immediately a 30-day license key. Now I have the academic version, and you can see that over here it says academic use only. So I have the academic version of Oxygen XML, and that's what I'm actually going to be using. Uh, now, here's the first thing to keep in mind. There are two types of documents that are kind of associated with each other. The first one is the XML schema, and the second one is the XML document itself. The XML schema basically um, are the rules that apply to the XML document. And so you can kind of develop them hand in hand, or you can develop the schema before and then the XML document later. Um, the good rule is usually to develop the schema before and then the XML document. And then so when you build the XML document and the associated schema is always being kept in mind when the XML document is being validated. And so the first thing you're going to do is when you come into the screen, when you install and open up Oxygen XML editor, you will see a screen that somewhat looks like this. I'm not sure what it looks like in Windows, but this is what it looks like in Mac. And you should be kind of seeing this too. So the first thing we want to do is we want to create a new document. And you can say new document. Now you'll see a couple of different types of documents over here. You'll see XML document, XSLT style sheet, ANT build XML schema. I've recently created schema and document, so which is why I'm seeing that under recently used. Um, if this is a fresh install, you probably won't see the recently used. So the first thing you want to do is you want to say XML schema, and so we can create this. And this is what you should be seeing, right? Um, Now, the first thing we want to keep in mind is that uh, in the schema, we're going to actually have various elements in the schema. Now, before we go on, let me kind of describe the scenario of the kind of XML document I'm trying to create. Um, I want to create an XML schema, an XML document for a transit system. So uh, the UGA transit system, there are a variety of routes that the UGA transit system runs, and these routes have various stops. And so why don't I lay out what the XML document looks like just a little bit beforehand, and then we can come back and kind of work through the schema part of that. And so I have created a new untitled schema. I'm also simultaneously going to create a new XML document over here, just so that you get a sense of what is the XML going to contain itself. And so what I want to do in the XML is I want to create an XML document for, let's say, a transit system. So, you know, one of the namespaces is going to be this idea of a transit system. And in transit system, we're going to have various transits. Uh, each transit may have, for instance, an ID, right? So a transit ID. Let's say, for instance, transit ID 1. So I'm just kind of laying out what the XML document might look like. So then we can go back and work with the schema to actually make this possible, just to give you a sense of what I'm working towards. And so transit has an ID, and the transit has a name, for instance, and one transit name could be UGA. And so we could maybe have many transit systems, right? And so the other transit um, could have maybe have an ID 2, and the name of this transit maybe could be Emory, right? And so we have different universities, right? Uh, and basically this XML document represents the transit systems of various universities. So there's a transit system for UGA, there's a transit system for Emory, there's a transit system for, uh, you know, Georgia Tech, and so there are various transit systems. Now each of these transit systems has a variety, have different routes in them. And so in the XML document, you could have, associated with every transit, there is a route, right? And each route actually maybe has a name. So just like UGA has a route that's referred to as family housing, for instance, right? And I live actually on this route, and so, or at least close by this route. So the route name could actually be family housing, and the route could have a duration, right? For instance, 45 minutes, right? Um, Now, a route also may have stops, and so we actually may want to have within route a specific element called a stop. But stops in fact have names, at least at UGA, and so we have a stop name. And for instance, one is family housing south, right? And each of these stops happen at specific times, and so we have a stop time, right? Let's say, for instance, 7:15 a.m., right? And so have uh, we can in fact have multiple stops that take place. And so we can actually in fact have multiple stops that take place within a route. So one would be family housing south, one would be at Adderall Hall, and please note the way I am indenting these. The indentation actually helps clarify the way you create and how do you interpret the XML document when you're actually looking at it itself. And so if it's 7:15 a.m., let's say it goes to Adderhold at 7:20 a.m. And so this is kind of what I want to represent in my XML document. And we can kind of lay this out in some detail. So I'm just gonna format this correctly, right? And I can maybe have not just one route, but I can have multiple routes. I can have multiple routes within a transit system. So it's not just that I have one route, I can have multiple routes, and I have multiple different types of transit systems. And so, and I can do this. I can do a similar thing for Emory. And so this is kind of what I want to represent in the XML schema. And so then let's go back to the schema and talk about the different elements we want to represent. one of the elements we actually want to represent in the schema, and the way you do that is you see the basic components on the right hand side in this area called palette. Uh, One of the things you can do is you can actually drag and drop this element. And so in the schema, one of the things you want to create is you want to create an element called transit system. This is kind of the root level element that all other elements are associated with. Another element you wanted to create, or we wanted to create, is this idea of, transit, right? Uh, and so what we did over here is that we dragged that element and dropped it on transit. So, right? And so we can do that. Whoops. Another element that we wanted to create was we wanted to create transit as an element within the schema. And so you can add another element called transit. Another element we wanted to create uh, was the location of the transit, where it was located. So we can have transit location. Another element we wanted to create was transit ID. We wanted to create another element, and these are all the different elements that will exist in the schema itself. We wanted to create a route, then the route has a name, then the route also has a duration, the route has a stop, and the stop has a name, stop has a duration. Now, what we've done is we've taken all the different elements of uh, all the different potential elements that um, exist in the XML document, and we've created all these elements in the schema. Now, what we've got to start doing is kind of start relating these elements to each other. Before we do that, let's go ahead and save this schema document, and I'm going to call this transit system. So you can see the name up here, it has changed to transitsystem.xsd. I'm also going to save this XML document, and I'm going to call it, again, transit system. So I have a transit system.xsd, I have an associated transit system.xml. They've both been saved in the same location. The first thing I want to do is I want to identify the relationship between transit systems and transits. And so what I do is I take transit and attach it to transit system. Now you'll see automatically what has been done is that a sequence has been created for transit. And so within a transit system, we now have many routes. And so what you can do is you can add routes to transit. And so you will notice that route becomes has this sequence. There are many this identifier over here is a sequence identifier, and basic says that there is a sequence for these routes that exist, right? Now, one other thing you want to keep in mind is that a transit actually has an ID, and so I can and what I'm going to do is basically dragging and dropping these and associating them with the right element over here. And so transit has an ID, whoops, I'm sorry. And so I've got to associate it after the sequence over here. And so transit has a location, and transit has an ID. And so you'll see that the transit system has many transits, has transits in it, and transit has transit ID, transit location. Now a route, again, has stops. And so if I drag stop over route, you will notice a sequence shows up. But the route has a duration, and again I want to identify it after the sequence, and so route duration, and I want to make sure that duration is before stop, and route name, and I want the route name before the route duration. Okay, uh, now again the stop has a name, and the stop has a duration. And so this is one way I can go ahead and create the XML schema for the associated XML document. And so, and now, so you see the relationship between the XML schema and the XML document. Basically, what you've done is you've created all the different elements that are part of your XML document or the schema, and then you've kind of created this hierarchical structure between them. Now, one of the things to keep in mind is that actually you can have many transits within transit system, and so what you want to do is you want to specify the relationship between transit system and transit. And so you right click on transit, and when you say unbounded, you will notice a one to many relationships, many relationship between transit system and transit. Similarly, a transit can have many routes, and so if you click on route and signify it as unbounded, you'll have a one-to-many relationship between transit and route. So transit can have many routes, and a route can have many stops. And so I'm similarly doing that with stop. And so now you see the relationship between transit system, transit, route, and stops. Another thing to keep in mind is that you can also specify the data type for any of these elements. And so transit ID, I do want it to be numerical, and so I can edit the attributes of it, and I can say the data type of transit is going to in fact be uh, an integer, for instance, right? Uh, and And so if I wanted to have, if I wanted to change that for something else as well, I could just as easily do that. Now the transit location, I can say I want the data type of this to be character or string of some kind. You can have to double click on it, and so I can say access string. And so I can specify the data type of any of these elements, right? Uh, and so I'm just going to keep saving this. And one thing you'll notice is that, you can break up each of these. You can break up each of these uh, elements within the XML schema now, right? Um, because each of these are what we used in here, and so they're kind of linked to each other. Uh, and so that becomes very useful. Uh, Now, another thing to keep in mind is that I have route duration and stop duration over here. In fact, you might think, okay, I don't want to actually have two durations. I just want to have one element called duration, which is basically going to keep track of the amount of time. Uh, uh, you could set that up as well. Actually, one of the issues over here is that I don't want this to be stop duration. This should actually be stop time, because duration is an integer, versus stop time is tracking the time at which the stop actually takes place. And so I have to change this to stop time over here, right? And so that'll make it okay. And I want route duration to be of integer type, so I'm gonna go back over here to route duration, and I'm going to edit its attributes and say that its type is going to be an integer. Whoops. I'm gonna make sure I'm gonna change that. I've said that it takes a default value, but I don't actually want it to have a default value. Okay, there we go. And so you can save this, right? And so this is basically the creation of the XML schema. Now, what you want to do is you want to associate the XML document with a specific schema, and it gives you several advantages. And so the way you associate the XML document with the schema is you need to specify what's the schema, and so the schema is the schema root is transit system, and so you want to specify that. And now again, you can take a look at the text and the chapter in the text and how to lay this out, but I'm just going to type out the namespace. Okay, so here's what I did. I had to actually specify the XML namespace, and so for that transit system that I opened up with, I added some additional information about the XML namespace, and I actually gave it the location of the access of the schema document, which is it was in the same directory, so it was transit system.xsd, and that's what I've specified over here. So what I've done is I have provided the XML namespace and location of the XSD document of the schema document. Now I had created this earlier, and so you will notice it's pretty much the same thing as I have just illustrated what I created earlier, but I actually went ahead and populated some of the data in the XML document. You'll see that the schema is the same, and so now what you notice is that um, if you want to if you do want to create a transit system, and over here you will notice that I have a transit system for UGA with two routes, Family Housing and Millage Avenue. Each has a couple of stops. I have another transit system for Emory. I can go ahead and create, in fact, another transit system. And what it does is that because the XSD document lays out the structure and the relationship between all of the three, I can now, it lays all of this out for me, so I can now specify the transit ID of 3, and I can actually fill in all this information over here. And I can give this name, uh, so I can lay this information out. And so this is how you can actually create the relationship between uh, an XSD document and an XML document. And so uh, do try this out and see whether this works for you. The way I would recommend you start is by actually creating a simple XML document laying out your basic structure, and then keep that in mind while you start creating your XSD document. Normally you're recommended to go ahead and create your schema document and then your XML document. What I realized is that sometimes when you're working within the XML document, you get a sense of all the different attributes that you want, um, and so that's kind of a good way to maybe actually work with this. You can lay out all the different elements, all the different attributes, and things of that nature. Uh, And so do try and see whether you're able to work with this. I'm going to be uploading both transit.xml and transit.xst in addition to this video, and maybe this will help. Uh, I hope this will help get you started with your individual XML assignment.